Ready to go.
Hello, and welcome everyone to this webinar offered by the Emeritus Center. I'm Jim Van Voorst, Vice President of the Emeritus Center, standing in for our President, Ed Fitzgerald, who's out of town today. With me is our speaker, Timmis, Croft, and Dean Napton, our program chair. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers after the presentation. Please let us know if you have any questions by using the Q&A, chat, or raise your hand options on Zoom. We will then unmute you so you can ask your questions and interact with the speaker. We will be recording this webinar so we can post it to our website for those Emeriti who are not able to attend. I turn things over to Dean, who will formally introduce our speaker.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Welcome from me, and we're very happy to have Timmis K. Croft here as our speaker today. She has served as Executive Director for the Albany Institute of History and Art since 2013 and Chief Curator for the museum since 1987. She has organized, researched, or supervised the development of over 70 exhibitions reflecting a broad range of topics related to art, history, and the culture of the Upper Hudson Valley, and national and international subjects. She has also lectured and published on a variety of topics, including 19th century cast iron stoves, Hudson River School, American folk art, and 19th and 20th century American art, decorative arts, the Albany mummies, and museum practices. In addition, Timmis was an adjunct professor for the public history program at the University of Albany and taught a graduate course called Curatorial Practices from 1991 until 2015. She is a member of the Executive Committee for Women at Work, board member for Discover Albany since 2021, and currently a COVID-19 task force member for the City of Albany. Timmis worked as a study leader for the Smithsonian Institution called Art Along the Hudson River 2007 to 2015. She received her Master of Arts in American Folk Culture from the Cooperstown Graduate Program, SUNY Oneonta, and her Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Hartwick College, Oneonta. Welcome, Timmis.
Yeah, no, thank you very, very much. I was always sort of interested to hear, your life activities being talked about. Yep, I remember all those exhibits too, right? All that fun. So anyway, I'd like to welcome everybody today. And what I thought I would do is just start by giving you just a very brief overview of the history of the Albany Institute. It's a bit of it goes pretty quickly. And then I'll be talking about some current and upcoming exhibitions. I welcome questions. I know the plan is towards the end of the presentation today, but if you have a question in the middle or it's in the chat, I think I have access to that. So anyway, Albany Institute, I hope many of you have been to the Albany Institute. I'll be asking that a little bit. I'm always curious also about how you receive information from the Albany Institute, whether it's an email blast, are you a member, a newsletter, is it in the newspaper, social media, that kind of thing, because it's helpful to know how you all learn about the activities at the museum along with everybody else. So, i.e., how do you get your news? So for the Albany Institute, we were founded in 1791. George Washington was president in 1791. And we are the oldest museum, depending on how you define museum, in New York State, and the second oldest museum in the country. So we have very distinguished history. We're older than the Smithsonian, older than the Louvre. And if you walk through the door of the Albany Institute in 1791, you actually would have been walking through a door in New York City, associated with the New York State Capitol or the New York State Legislature. And the Capitol, as you may recall, moved around for a year or two, a couple of times, and then settled in Albany. And so the Albany Institute has been sort of physically located in Albany since 1796. The first name of the Albany Institute was the Society for the Promotion of Agriculture, Arts, and Manufacturing, and we were more of a learned society, modeled after the Royal Society in London, where people gathered to give talks on a whole variety of different topics. So when people were finally in Albany, we have some great early records of people giving talks on the best woolen samples, or the best butter churner, or the best way to raise merino sheep. And there are illustrations and conversations about that. So it gives you a sense of the roots of the Albany Institute, and the idea of literally giving a talk on a better butter churner and having a drawing, it does symbolize those, as I mentioned, early agricultural roots. Then going forward, people started receiving prizes for the best woolen sample or the best idea and that type of thing. And they could receive a silver bowl or a silver cup. So it was really the forerunner of the the agricultural fairs that were started at the early 19th century. And then I'm just going to fast forward really quickly to 1886. In 1886, the city of Albany celebrated its bicentennial of its founding from 1686. They celebrated by having an exhibition down at in downtown Albany at where at the Albany Academy, and that building, federal building built by Philip Hooker, is right across from the City Hall right now. So in that space, they created an exhibition of 4,000 objects that they borrowed from people who lived in our region, in and out of our region. 25,000 people came to see it during a 2-week run. And it was so successful and so popular that the people in the city of Albany decided to have the Albany Institute, which at that time was called the Albany Institute, join forces with the Albany Art Gallery starting in 1850 and the Albany Historical Society. And we joined forces under the roof of the Albany Institute. The museum rented space on State Street for a while. And then in 1907, we built the building that we're in now that I hope most of you have come to. And when we opened the doors, there were a number of exhibitions, but probably, and they were art, decorative arts, historical artifacts, and ethnographic materials from all around the world. And that is actually why and how the Albany Institute has 2 Egyptian mummies here. And the mummies are probably the most popular exhibition. Those mummies have been on view since 1907. And the reason we acquired them is the board of directors thought at that particular time, in order to be a real museum, they needed to have real Egyptian mummies. So fast forward from 1907 right to 1926, and the board of directors decided to refine the mission of the Albany Institute. And we really became a regional museum focused on the art, history, and culture of the Upper Hudson Valley. And all of those other natural history specimens or ethnographic materials basically were all deaccessioned, is the proper word for it, and sold to other museums or to the general public. And that was all done in the 1920s. And the mission we had in the 1920s is more or less the same mission it has today. The language has changed, but we do collect objects and manuscript materials with a documented relationship to the art, history, and culture of the Upper Hudson Valley. We have about 35,000 objects and 1 million documents in our library. And so it's sort of, and the other thing to think about in terms of the Albany Institute, it's a museum of both art and history And we are, and for every object, we tend to like to know who owned it, who sold it, who sat in it, who donated it to us, and that type of thing. And because we're a history museum, we collect the history surrounding these objects so that what we do best is tell stories with the collections. And any one object can tell multiple stories, and the more the merrier. We collect from the 17th century to the present. So we have a very active collecting currently. So that is just a really quick overview of the museum. And I think now what I'm going to do in just a second, I'll be sharing my screen, but to invite you to, I hope you've been to the museum. I'm going to be focusing on with a few slides of what I call the changing exhibitions. But in addition to our changing exhibitions, we have what we call long-term exhibitions, such as the Hudson River School exhibit, the Ancient Egyptian Gallery, also Colonial Albany. And those 3 exhibitions are really curriculum-based exhibitions because we welcome on site or through Zoom a lot of school children, in some cases literally from around the world. So those are ongoing constants. And then changing exhibitions are always a lot of fun because we can bring an exhibition on many different topics, as you will see. So I am going to share my screen right now and see how successful I am at this. Very good, very good. All right, so the upcoming exhibitions are range. There are a lot of different topics, and I've started with this one because the image is called Pumpkinhead, and this is by Jamie Wyeth. And I'll be talking about an exhibition here highlighting 4 generations of Wyeth family artists. So I'm going to, but I want you to keep this in your head here. And this is a self-portrait by Jamie Wyeth. And Jamie Wyeth is the son of Andrew Wyeth, who you may recognize his name. And he's just sort of playful, a little mysterious, but has many of the attributes of his painting style, a realist painting style that his father and grandfather had. So now I'm going to move in. And during COVID, as you can all well imagine, we were thinking about our exhibition schedule for 2021. We made some changes to it. And we are very fortunate here at the museum to have curators who are very talented. We're also fortunate to have terrific collections. So we were thinking about COVID in the 1920s and the Spanish flu in 1918. And here we are in a pandemic. What do we have in our collections from the 1920s and 30s to show in 2021? So with that, we looked at our railroad collection, and the museum is very fortunate to have hundreds of materials related to train travel and trains, particularly the New York Central. And I want to give my colleague, friend and mentor, friend and colleague, Norman Rice, some credit here. And you may have heard that that Norman passed away this week, sort of at age 95. But Norman was responsible for a lot of the collecting at the Albany Institute in 1959, he was invited to go down to New York and take his pick from the New York Central Railroad collection, which was really extraordinary. So thinking about the 1920s, this is a time where rail travel was on the wane for goods and services and passengers, and really kind of reinvented itself to be an experience, and where you would have this romantic train ride and you would be surrounded by beautiful design and wonderful service, great food, and those kinds of things. So that train travel at that time was really kind of luxurious and fast. So this is a view in the exhibition. We have examples of models and photographs and other kinds of decorative arts, which I'll talk about. But probably the most important thing that I think is really interesting is in the 1920s, to promote rail travel, the railroads started creating art posters. And in the exhibition, we have a lot of the original artwork from which the posters were created to entice people to ride the rails and sort of make it as a vacation itself, being on the rails. And some of the posters are showing you how fast the trains were, and what the kinds of the interiors and exteriors. And some of the posters didn't even show trains. They just showed you the scenery that you would be looking at. Then in the 1930s, as the competition with airlines came into play, companies completely redesigned their trains to look more like automobiles, or excuse me, airplanes, because that was the competition. And they hired designers to come in and really change it all up again. And the cut, if you were dining in the restaurant, you would have specially designed silverware, plates, even the matches that they gave you on the plane were all part of it. Another important thing to think about in terms of the trains, this is also the time when the Pullman company was really supplying the restaurants and the sleeping cars. And the Pullman company almost exclusively employed African Americans, and it was a good job, considered to be a good job. Certainly there's discrimination, as you would expect during this particular time. And they were also able to form the first African-American union through the Pullman company. And all of this information you're able to see in the exhibit at the Albany Institute. And there are actually 3 rooms. I just have just these 2 slides here. And then in the 1940s, I just wanted to finish up with that, because they were all ready to launch a brand new train called the Empire Express that was going to go really fast. And their date to open and launch this whole new railroad line happened on the day of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and everything just kind of went back, and you didn't really hear very much about the trains, because obviously we're thinking about other things at that time. So we decided to do the railroads to celebrate the age of train travel. And then we also went into our closets in storage, where we have a wonderful collection of clothing, and thought we would do an exhibition on fashionable frocks of the 1920s. And here's one of our storage areas, and the museum has terrific collections in this particular area. And so everything you see is in the museum's collection. Our curator, Diane Shuchuk, pulled out all our dresses from the 1920s. We had a team of people helping work on them. And if you think about the 1920s, this is the decade where women received the right to vote. Clothing changed considerably. They were certainly not as constricting as they had been previously. And sewing machines became more readily available to people, and patterns from McCall's and Simplicity and that type of thing. And so the clothing was very complicated in the sense that much of it was beaded and hand beaded, but the patterns themselves were a lot simpler. And so the show, I hope you can come and see it, really shows off what the 1920s look like. And everybody thinks about the flappers and that how these dresses were above the knee and all of that type of thing. But after the source that we used to look at the 1920s was Montgomery Ward's catalogs. You could look at Sears catalogs too. And it really showed, the lengths of everything and the kind of slips and other types of things that you needed. But it was a decade, about 10 years of these, I'm going to call it waistless dresses, but beautifully fashioned. And in the show, we know a lot of the dressmakers, we know who wore these dresses. So again, it's telling the stories of these fashionable frocks. So it's a beautiful installation. So I hope you can come by and see that. So those two shows that I just showed you are drawn from our own collection. The next major show, which is featured at the museum, is called the Wyeths, 3 Generations, work from the Bank of America collection. So this is a traveling exhibition. All of the works in the show are owned by the Bank of America. And the Bank of America has a philanthropic side to it, part of its foundation. And not only have they collected a lot of art, but they also support museum programs, free admission programs. So if any of you are Bank of America card holders, the first weekend of every month, you can get in for free to museums across the country. And they also support conservation activities. The last time we had a Bank of America show, it was on baseball, America's Greatest Game. And I don't know if anybody happened to see that, which was a lot of fun. And this was on the Wyeths. And I have asked the regional bank president, well, how does the Bank of America, where did you get the collection of the Wyeths? And he shared the story about how when banks over the years, and Bank of America, has been around for many generations, but as they acquire banks, they often acquire the bank building. And with that, they acquire everything inside the building. And a number of the bank acquisitions decades ago was in Pennsylvania, where the Wyeths were from, and started a collection of Wyeths, which they added to. So I think it's interesting just to know how the bank acquired their artwork. And so there 4 generations. We'll see N.C. Wyeth, who is best known as an illustrator. His son is Andrew Wyeth, and this is a painting by Andrew Wyeth. And then there's Henriette Wyeth, who is Andrew's sister, and she did mostly still lifes and portraits. And then the 4th is Jamie Wyeth, who did Pumpkinhead. So, and Andrew Wyeth, and it's hard to see, until you come to the museum and look at it. He worked mostly in watercolor, which is very fast on paper. And he also worked in egg tempera. And an egg tempera type of medium is when you mix egg yolks with distilled water and powdered pigments for your paint. And you mix it all up to the consistency and you add layers. And he works mostly on paper, and it has sort of an opaque feeling or quality to it. This is work of N.C. Wyeth, who is the grandfather, and he was a very well-known illustrator. And I don't know if you can, how big it is on your screen, but this is an original oil painting for a illustration that is going to be in a book, and you can see the sizes of the book right here in front. So you create an oil painting for the illustration, and that's what N.C. Wyeth did. And the one that we're highlighting here is Rip Van Winkle, which was written by Washington Irving. N.C. Wyeth illustrated a lot of the classics. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, Rip Van Winkle, a lot of very popular Revolutionary War books at the time. And just to remember, you always need to create a large painting in order to do a photo mechanical reduction for a book. And here's the gentleman, the sailor, is also by N.C. Wyeth. So the show is there are about 60 works of art altogether, ranging from NC to Jamie Wyeth. And the difference, and when you go through and look at them, you can see the different artists. You can see all of them worked in illustration, but they use different mediums. And that's the piece that's interesting to see. And I wanted to let everybody know that Victoria Wyeth, who is Andrew Wyeth's granddaughter, is coming to Albany this weekend. And on Friday night at the Albany Institute, she's going to do a PowerPoint illustrated talk about her family. And we were talking earlier, and she is not an artist, but has great family stories to tell. And she's a bit irreverent. She's a lot of fun and very entertaining. So if you're at all interested in meeting Victoria Wyeth, you can sign up online at the Albany Institute. There's a reception with it. And then on Saturday night, she's giving 2 gallery tours. I think one at 5 and one at 6:30. And as I say, she's very approachable and a lot of fun. And then on Sunday morning, she's going to be at the museum, and she's giving free gallery tours to families. So if you have grandchildren or little ones, I think more likely it would be grandchildren, it would be a great time also to meet Victoria Wyeth and come to the Albany Institute. So that's all that's on view right now. But I did want to talk a little bit about some upcoming exhibitions, because we plan our exhibitions 5 years out for the most part. You know, we always have a few open galleries because we like to be nimble and take advantage of opportunities. But basically, we're planned out until 2026. So our next exhibition is by Li Wen. And Li Wen is from Taiwan, but she is a graduate of the University of Albany. She received her master's degree in art there about 20 years ago. She spent about 10 years living and working in the Hudson Valley, and then she's been in Taiwan for the last 10 years. She's a very successful artist in Asia, and right now, she has about 40 paintings, believe it or not, on a container that's on its way sailing from Taiwan to Long Beach, California. So I'm really hoping it arrives in time to open in January. If not, the dress show will stay up and we'll do some other kinds of things, but everything should be all set. But she does very, very large landscapes. They're water, earth, fire, or air. And I have 2 examples. And if you can imagine these 2 paintings being 12 feet high and 20 feet long, there is if you're walking into her landscapes. And she has a wet canvas, and she takes a stylus, and all of those lines she draws in a wet canvas of oil paint. So it's very detailed and painstaking. And so those are her landscape series. And the other things she does are giant flowers. And she's never shown her giant flowers, whether they're lilies or peonies or sunflowers, in this country. So it'll be great to be able to see that. But she also branches out, and her paintings have been turned into clothing, into umbrellas, into sailboat sails, all sorts of things. So she's a very creative artist, and she is an artist who markets her work very well. So she will be taking over almost the entire main floor of the museum. So in the 2022, our umbrella theme is going to be about the environment. Lee Wen works in the really showing off the 4 elements of the environment. And the artist who will be with us in the fall is an Englishman. His name is Paul Scott. And for those of you who may collect or have blue and white ceramics, they're very distinctive. They were made in the 1820s and 30s. And they're these blue and white floral pieces. And they generally had a print in the center of the dishes or the pitchers, and it would be, of the Erie Canal or other views along the Hudson River. So all these English potters were using American scenes and transfer printed earthenware and putting them on the pots, and they were very collectible. So the English artist who is in the foreground on the right, the gentleman, has taken these ceramics, and instead of putting 19th century American views on them, he's kind of turned it around. So in this case, you see a pitcher with planes. Sometime you'll see a platter with nuclear power plants. So he's has a contemporary spin, and again, it is about the environment. So this is a particular plate that he did when he was here. That shows I think it's the Rensselaer dump. That's the easiest way. I think it's called a landfill, but it's basically the Rensselaer dump. And he replaced the center with this view that you can see where he took the photograph that had a view from East Greenbush or Rensselaer looking east to Albany. So it's a similar kind of thing. So again, he's making a variety of political statements, but a really interesting artist in that respect. And then we'd love to do programming for intergenerational families. This is a great exhibition of highlighting the world of Jan Brett. Jan Brett lives in the Berkshires. She's an American illustrator and children's book writer, and she has a very distinctive style, and she is sending over a whole series of the original watercolors for her books. That same idea of artists creating original works to be used in the printed format. So it certainly will be a lot of fun. And then the last show that we're going to be featuring next year is a series of photographs created by Gordon Parks. And for those who, Gordon Parks is a very well-known photojournalist, working from the 1940s to the 1960s and 70s. You can see him with a camera. He picked up a camera at age 25 and started taking photographs. He worked for Vogue in the beginning, and when he worked for Vogue, he was one of the first photographers in fashion to do what you would call moving shots, where the model is not sitting looking glamorous in whatever clothing, but they're actually on the move. So, he changed the way fashion photography was conceived of. He was an innovator in that particular area. And then he went on really to work for, for Life magazine and a number of other large magazines, and did a lot of photo essays on African Americans and the lives of African Americans in terms of elevating discussions of race, civil rights, poverty, and a variety of things. And some of his best known pieces, he reconceived the American Gothic. Instead of a farmer and his wife with a pitchfork and another farm implement, it was a black and white photograph of a woman with a broom and a mop, and just talking about social class and that type of thing. So the show that we're going to have is a whole series that he did on women and their children from cities from around the country. So that is a sort of an overview of where we are. So I'm looking forward to questions that people may have. I have some questions for the group as well. And my first question to you, and we'll think about this, how it goes. I'm really interested, as I mentioned in the beginning, how you learn about programs at the Albany Institute so that you can come back. And then I'm also always interested to find out what people collect. So those are my two questions to the group, but I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Timmis, for a very, very informative talk. I'm sure there's many more things that you could have went into regarding the museum, but thank you. Thank you. I do have a question for you, though, while we're thinking through your question to us. When you walk through the museum, is there an exhibition or an item that has a special impact on you that gives you a little bit of a buzz, so to speak, as you walk by it?
Well, I've done so many exhibits. I love them all. But, one of the great things about being a curator is you're often, have an opportunity to do an exhibit. And you really sometimes start with not knowing a lot of information. So you do a lot of research, and then you become an instant expert on a particular topic. The Wyeth would be a good example. And then you really learn a lot about it, and it's our job to talk about the Wyeth and from the point of view of everybody being at the same place. We know a lot about them. What can we help, and what we can tell you about? Thinking about an exhibit that I really I think is really quite wonderful at the museum is the show on the Hudson River School, because we have 83 paintings on view right now, made by both men and women who painted landscape in the 19th century, from the time period of the 1825 to about 1880, 1890. And this is the largest exhibition featuring American landscape paintings from this particular type, certainly in New York State, or certainly in the Northeast. So that's for all of us who are from the region, being able to come to the museum and being able to see those kinds of examples, I think is very special. I will add to that one piece and say that most of the 19th century landscape artists were men, and most of them either attended academies or worked with other artists as mentors and that type of thing. But there are a number of women artists from the 19th century, and most of these artists, the women were either sisters and their brother was an artist, or their father was an artist, or their uncle was an artist. And these women were able to learn the tools of the trade in terms of mixing your own paints, having access to paper and canvas, and were going off on these sketching trips during the summer months and painting in the winter months. So we have three paintings by Sarah Cole, and Sarah Cole was the sister of Thomas Cole, who's considered to be the founder of the so-called Hudson River School Hudson River School is a particular style of painting. And then we just acquired 3 works by Julia Hart Beers. And she too was her 2 brothers were artists. So I think that that's a pretty special opportunity to be able to
Sure.
see.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
I see some comments from Scott, and then I see a question from Carol. Scott says, thanks so much for being with us. And he says that he learns about the museum's activities via social media. I mean, he's a collector of New York Yankees memorabilia.
Oh,
He's proud of having an autograph collection of over 100 players who caught for the Yankees.
great. Great. Well, I too am I can say this, I'm a Yankee fan. Remember, we're on the Jersey side of the river. So, and when we did the baseball show, not only did we borrow things from the Bank of America collection, but I did a call to the community and invited people to bring in their local baseball. So we did a lot on regional history because it's a great story of baseball, and also major league collectors. So your autograph collection of Yankee pitchers, I wish I knew you then.
Carol, you can unmute.
Timmis, thank you for a great program. In terms of what I collect, when I moved from downtown Albany in a large house, I had to downsize my collections, but I kept a lot of my snow globes. And I have a collection of paperweights from Scotland, from a small family-owned glass blowing operation in Scotland, which is no longer in business. So I think they're more valuable now because there are quite a few collectors of this kind of paperweight. I have a couple of questions for you. First, I want to compliment you on an exhibit that you had of Len Tantillo's work, which was excellent. And he's going to be a speaker with Paul Grandal on our series next week. So we're lucky to have both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and Len is a wonderful, wonderful speaker. And the show we did with Len, I think we were planning that for almost 5 years.
Well, there were some beautiful pieces in it.
And things that he hadn't seen in 10 or 15 years. So he was like a kid in a candy store walking around his show saying, oh, I forgot all about this one. This one's excellent. It's a lot of fun. So
excellent. I'm glad you have fun doing these.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's the most, it's a great job. How can you not have fun? Talking to collectors, talking to artists, talking to community members, and then every once in a while I used to think, oh my God, I get paid for having this much fun.
Exactly. So one question for you. We were all saddened that Norman Rice has died. And I remember, there were years where you would go to any kind of cultural event in Albany and he was there. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's anybody that you can think of who could take his place, who could, I'm thinking of Karen and Chet Opelka. They do a lot of support of the arts in this area, but, who's the next Norman Rice for this area?
I'm going to be, I might be biased, but I don't think there'll ever be another Norman Rice. He spent 70 years in Albany and he was just, he loved the stuff. So he was obviously a museum curator. And when you're a curator, you just love the stuff, you love the history, you love the research. Norman loved genealogy. So he was very adept at tracing family histories and loved to do that. So that was very helpful. And his knowledge of Albany area history was, really probably unparalleled in a way, because when you've been living it for 70 years, you know a lot, you've seen a lot of things. And after Norman retired as curator, or excuse me, as director, we would meet regularly, and I would always have a list of questions because of he had a encyclopedic computerized mind, but as he used to tell me, you can't bring it up all the time. It takes a little while. So we would have the questions, and a day, if he couldn't answer everything that day, I mean, he would be back in a couple of days and give me the answer. So he also did a lot of research, and he, loved libraries and that type of thing. But to your point, his advice to me was always make sure you're out in the community, because you never know, where the next great collection will be for the Albany Institute or that type of thing. So he really enjoyed the community and being in Albany. So as I say, I'm biased. There could never be another Norman Rice, but who knows? Never say never, right?
So I'm really looking forward to that Lee Wen exhibit too. Some of those large canvases must be just spectacular.
They are, and the flowers are shaped canvases. So when you walk into a room with these flowers, they just, again, they're 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide. They're taller than they are wide. And to look at the quality of the artwork and how she creates all those strokes with a stylus pen in wet, while the paint is wet, I could never do anything like that. You'd be, driving yourself crazy, but it's, for her, it's what she does. And she works on large scaffolding setups and moves really quickly on a lot of these areas. And I'm also impressed with her marketing and product development. So since we're here in my office, oops, wait a minute. Sorry about this. If I had thought you were asking, I would have brought down more props, but so this is another one of her paintings. This is a peony. This is just a card, but you can see how intricate they are. And then, she'll go on and make, this is, water bottles, all of those kinds of things. So she's just really creative. And in the Asian market, she's had many shows. And because of the large scale nature of her paintings, they're in a lot of really big hotels. And this is going to be her first exhibition in the United States since she left about 10 years ago. So I think it'll be a lot of fun.
I'm glad she's coming back to Albany.
Yep, she comes back, and with the Taiwanese government, she has to quarantine in a state hotel for 14 days before she can go home. So there are a lot of just challenges with COVID all around the world, and there are different requirements. But she will be here. She will be giving gallery talks and working with our docents. And so I hope everybody has a chance to meet her. She's very thoughtful about her work.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there, folks?
Yeah, anything else you all collect? I'm always curious about what people collect. Not that it may not be for the museum, but and that's not the point. It's just sort of fun to see what people collect. So Jim, do you collect anything?
Well, about the only thing I have, it is not a large collection, are some golf balls. The golf has changed over the years. The technology has gotten so much better. You go back to, not too far back, but balata balls was a big item back in the. And I've got a couple of those still laying around, and I don't know if I call it a collection, but I have about a dozen different golf balls.
And as you're not surprised, there's a golf museum. I can't remember where it is, but we've been contacted by them because we have 4 paintings by David Lithgow, who was an Albany artist who created these 4 paintings to talk about the early history of golf in Albany. And, you know, I should know, but it's 16 something, right? It doesn't make that much difference. There is a record in early Albany documents about outlawing playing golf in the streets because the balls were hitting the houses. And if you were lucky enough to have glass and you had a golf ball hit the house. So these are wonderful, you know, sort of reimagined 17th century paintings of early Albany and golf. So the Golf Museum loved them.
I bet. That's great.
So Dean, do you collect anything?
I was giving that some thought. I mean, I'm at the age now where I'm trying to get rid of stuff, not, you know, collect more things. But the one thing that I have was something I started with my mother, probably back in the 70s. I used to give her glass figurines like a squirrel or a caterpillar and you know, since she passed those all back to me, and I seem to want to add to that collection. So I look for unusual, you know, glass pieces. I just picked up a very interesting elephant one. And actually, since we're doing show and tell, let me grab that.
Good.
So it's a little different shaped.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not old or anything, but it's an unusual color and unusual shape for an elephant. But anyway, that's all I hang on to.
Well, I think interestingly enough, Carol and Dean, glass is a market that seems to be growing, you know, in value. Not that museums, we can't talk about how much anything is worth, but we all watch Antique Roadshow and read collectible magazines and things like that. So glass seems to do very, very well. And my feeling about collectors is you all have the passion, the time, and the money. And it's not about how much money you have, but just, you know, the pursuit of objects, and museums at the end of the day often benefit from your passion, knowledge of collecting. So I've always admire collectors, and it could be bottle openers or Pez dispensers, you know, but most people collect something. And I collect rocks, and they're pretty small. They're not, I don't collect big rocks, but I collect rocks from different places that I go. I have to sneak them into my luggage and everything. My husband says, no, not another rock. But I love them.
I think that's great.
So
Wonderful.
anyway, so one last thing I'll share with everybody, depending on whether I'm going to be retiring from the Albany Institute.
Oh,
And Norman hired me as an intern. So, you know, we had often talked about a lot of things, but so I will be retiring when they have find a new director, and the search is in progress. And when I talked to Norman last week, his number one question is, have they found a new director yet? So in process. So, and
well, congratulations. You're going to miss it.
Oh, I will miss it. Bittersweet, but
Yeah.
you know, all those rocks means that I travel places. So what am I going to be doing? I'll be traveling and collecting.
Excellent. Excellent.
Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to join your group. So
Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
great.
Thank
All
Yes,
right.
thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye, Timmis.
Bye, Timmis.
And I'll just say that next, as we alluded to, next Monday we have Len Tantillo and Paul Grandal, and about the Albany Waterway project. So that should be fun. So stay tuned. 3 in a row, which is odd for us, but it's all good.
It's all good. And it's a great project. And the two of them are very funny talking about it.
Yes.
So you'll all
Yes.
have fun. Make sure you're all back for that.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
again. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.